Welcome to the debate. I want you to imagine a man who basically built his neighborhood block by block, a real pillar of his community, who is now reduced to, well, to just a 9-digit billing code.
Right, just a number on a page.
Exactly. And all because his family missed like a single signature on a 40-page document. So picture that family sitting around a worn kitchen table. On one side, there's a framed photograph of this man. Let's just call him Arthur.
Okay, Arthur.
And on the other side, just an absolute avalanche of sterile, heavily stapled diagnostic paperwork. As Arthur faces this new reality of cognitive decline, that mountain of administrative noise doesn't just document his illness, it actively threatens to completely swallow the photograph.
Yeah, it's a haunting visual, and unfortunately, it captures exactly what happens every single day when this massive clinical machine collides with a human household.
It really does.
I mean, the paperwork just obscures the person entirely. It effectively replaces the father, the grandfather, the neighborhood anchor with a file.
Exactly. And that very real, very present tension is what brings us to the core of our discourse today. We are looking at some deeply moving source material on redefining dementia care navigation.
Which is a remarkably complex issue.
It is. And the central question we're pulling from it is this. When a family is thrust into this incredibly complex healthcare crisis, how do they actually protect their loved one?
Right.
The material presents a fascinating duality, and it's what we'll be wrestling with. I'll be arguing that true protection against this institutional maze comes fundamentally from systemic mastery. I'm talking about the absolute necessity of weaponizing HMO rules, achieving legal perfection in your documents, and just structurally outmaneuvering the clinical framework.
And I'll be arguing that those clinical structures, by their very nature, strip away dignity. They exist primarily to protect corporate metrics, not human beings.
Therefore, true defense requires a fundamental language shift, a deep cultural realignment that rejects cold institutional jargon in favor of centering the family's humanity and sovereignty.
So let's establish the realities here. The material we are examining outlines a daily cadence of survival and strategy. It talks about what it calls Mindful Monday and Thankful Thursday, right? Those specific milestones.
Yes, and my perspective is rooted firmly in the harsh reality of those specific days. Yes, the clinical system is deeply flawed. Yes, it's full of cold terminology. But a philosophical rejection of that system does not keep the lights on.
And
it certainly doesn't get a dementia patient into a vital appointment with a cognitive specialist. To protect Arthur, you have to structurally outmaneuver the system.
But it won't cost.
Well, the material explicitly details the necessity of weaponizing HMO versus PPO network rules, right? To force these massive bureaucracies to move at the speed of a family's crisis. Without an airtight power of attorney structure or a forensic understanding of how to prevent an automated omission notice, a family is they're completely defenseless.
I hear the pragmatism in that, I really do. And no one is denying the system is a beast. But engaging the system primarily on its own terms inevitably leads families into what the material calls the navigator illusion.
The navigator illusion?
Right. You think you are mastering the system because you're playing by their rules, but you are actually just falling into a trap. You end up relying on this hospital-billed nurse navigator who protects hospital metrics and, as the text so poignantly notes, doesn't even know Arthur's name.
Yeah, but they know how to get him care.
Do they? My position is that real defense starts with a language shift. We have to completely flip the script on corporate clinical jargon. Relying on their structures and their vocabulary turns a neighborhood anchor into a mere geriatric patient.
It's a medical classification, though.
But it reduces a lifetime of legacy into a set of billing codes. Real protection requires replacing those terms. We have to transform sterile case management into a wraparound family shield, and a geriatric patient into a senior hidden treasure. If you don't win that cultural and linguistic battle first, your legal mastery is really just securing a more efficient pathway to institutional dehumanization.
Well, those are two very different maps for navigating the exact same crisis. Let's look closely at the first major crossroads families hit, which is this concept of institutional navigation versus the so-called navigator illusion you just mentioned.
Yeah, I come at it from a different way when we look at navigation. The inherent conflict of interest in the clinical system is staggering, and I think the source material exposes this beautifully.
How so?
Picture Arthur's children, right? They are drowning in the background, desperately trying to figure out what to do. The hospital steps in and offers a nurse navigator. Sounds incredibly helpful, doesn't it?
Of course. It sounds like a lifeline.
But if you're listening to this, you really have to ask yourself, who is that navigator actually working for? The clinical navigation system is designed from the ground up to protect the hospital's pocketbook.
Well, sure, they are employees of the healthcare system.
Exactly. It is a metric-driven role. They are optimizing discharge times, they're minimizing liability, ensuring billing continuity. They are not there to preserve Arthur's dignity or the family's emotional bandwidth.
I think that's a bit cynical, but okay.
That is the navigator illusion. It's the false sense of security that the institution has deployed someone to protect you when they've actually deployed someone to protect themselves. This is why professional, culturally aligned support coordination is the only way to genuinely protect the family household.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. Culturally aligned support sounds ideal, but let's look at the mechanics of the crisis. Arthur's cognitive health is actively slipping.
Right. Access to the specialist he desperately needs is locked behind network gatekeepers. Think of the HMO system not as a hospital, but as an exclusive nightclub with a very strict bouncer.
Okay.
Affirm Arthur's dignity out on the curb all night long, but that bouncer isn't letting you in without the exact right password. The immediate survival tactic isn't changing the navigator's title. It is legally forcing the bouncer to step aside.
But how do you actually do that without just getting absorbed into their metric-driven machine?
By weaponizing their own rules against them. If you're listening and wondering, how do I force a massive HMO to do what I want? You use the mechanism of network adequacy.
Right. The geographic limits.
Exactly. The material highlights this struggle. Insurance companies are legally bound by state network adequacy requirements. If an HMO cannot provide a cognitive specialist within a certain geographic radius, say 30 miles, or within a specific time frame, they're in breach of their own regulatory requirements.
True.
So systemic mastery means you don't just ask nicely. You formally cite the network adequacy deficiency and legally compel them to approve an out-of-network PPO provider, but you force them to cover it at the in-network cost. You demand a single case agreement.
Right.
That is the specific mechanism that bypasses the bouncer. That is what gets Arthur to the doctor.
I acknowledge the utility of a single case agreement. It's a clever mechanism, I'll give you that. But we have to look at what happens next. What good is bypassing the bouncer if the club inside is fundamentally toxic to the patient's spirit?
Toxic is a strong word.
But it's true. You force the HMO to move, but you are moving them toward a clinical framework that inherently limits care options to models serving the institution. When you rely entirely on the system's legal mechanisms, you default to the system's pathways.
Which are the only pathways that exist.
The material points out a heartbreaking reality here. The clinical system frequently defaults to palliative or end-of-life care only for advanced dementia patients. Why? Because financially they view the patient as a depreciating asset.
Well, they view them based on prognostic algorithms and actuarial tables. Yes, it's cold, but it's the math of the system.
Which is exactly why, I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that systemic mastery alone is the answer. Let me tell you why. If you play by their rules, you accept their math.
True advocacy demands what the material calls non-palliative care navigation. It demands protecting the living quality of the patient, not just managing their decline until discharge. And you cannot get there without fundamentally redefining the language. Take a term like social determinants of health, or SDOH. Very common term. The clinical system loves this term, but it sanitizes the crisis. It turns a family's struggle to buy groceries or pay rent into a neat little academic checkbox on an intake form. But it's a classification tool for public health. It helps allocate resources, but it abstracts the human suffering. Stripping away clinical jargon like SDOH and replacing it with what the text calls the 80% reality, the rent, the food, the peace, the dignity, it forces the focus on the real, tangible household threats. Changing the language changes the orientation of the care. I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because redefining language, while noble and while it might be incredibly psychologically comforting to the family,
It is comforting.
Sure, but it does absolutely nothing to stop the gears of the machine from crushing you. Let's talk about the mechanism of an automated denial notice, what the text ties to Thankful Thursday.
Okay.
Imagine a family that has embraced your language shift. They call their care plan a wraparound family shield. They call Arthur a senior hidden treasure. Then Thursday morning, they get a cold, automated omission notice in the mail denying coverage, or a letter from the bank freezing Arthur's accounts.
Because the system is inherently hostile.
Because of a missed checkbox. They didn't get denied because the system lacked empathy, or because they used the wrong cultural terminology. They got denied because a vital signature line on a power of attorney document wasn't legally perfect.
Well, sure.
If you're listening and you think a standard downloaded power of attorney template is enough, it usually isn't. An airtight POA requires specific statutory powers explicitly listed, like the power to authorize facility transfers, or a superseding clause for HIPAA releases. If those exact phrases are missing, the algorithm kicks it out.
I know.
No human even looks at it. It's an automated omission notice. And that single omission can shatter your wraparound shield instantly. It halts care, it freezes assets, and it leaves Arthur completely exposed. Legal perfection isn't the enemy of human dignity, it is the armor that protects it.
Look, I am certainly not arguing that the power of attorney shouldn't be signed, or that it shouldn't be accurate.
Well, it sounded like it.
No, I am arguing about the orientation of the family's energy. If the family is singularly focused on becoming amateur legal scholars to fight omission notices, they are playing a reactionary game designed by the antagonist. The automatic denial notice is just a symptom of a system that views Arthur as a case file.
Right.
When Auntie Naomi in the text teaches the family how to build that non-palliative wraparound shield, she isn't just giving them a new vocabulary list. She is teaching them to establish their sovereignty first. The legal perfection is a byproduct of knowing what you are defending.
But if the byproduct isn't executed perfectly, the sovereignty doesn't matter to the state, it just doesn't.
It matters to the family's survival. You aren't just defending a legal healthcare directive, you're defending a human being's legacy. If you don't make that language shift first, if you don't center the humanity, the family burns out fighting the paperwork. They lose sight of why they are fighting because they've been forced to view their father through the cold lens of liability and compliance.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. I would argue the family doesn't burn out because they lose sight of his humanity. They burn out because of the crushing, inescapable financial and administrative realities of the disease.
Which are immense.
You say a wraparound family shield protects their dignity, but dignity doesn't pay a $4,000 a month adult daycare bill.
No, it doesn't.
And this brings us to what I see as the most complex part of the material, the financial reality of long-term care exclusions and the SGBTB standard. The sticker shock. Massive sticker shock. The material points out that families realize very quickly during Wellness Wednesday that the clinic does not care about the household budget. Copays, coinsurance, the massive out-of-pocket percentages required to keep a dementia patient safe at home or in day programs, these will drain a family's generational wealth in a matter of months.
Easily.
Exclusions in standard insurance policies leave the family holding the bag.
Which is exactly why the 80% reality of the household matters far more than the clinical billing codes. The system ignores that 80% reality entirely.
But how do you actually solve that 80% reality? How do you pay for it? The text provides a very structural solution, the SGBTB standard.
Right.
For those unfamiliar with the term in this context, we are talking about standardized guidelines for business to business. Basically, leveraging enterprise-level corporate billing infrastructure to fund community care. This isn't just about cultural reframing. This is about using the exact homemaker and companion guideline-specific state waivers and CPT billing codes that legally qualify non-medical home care for reimbursement.
It's an aggressive strategy.
It is. It means building a system that extracts resources from the corporate level to sustain the family level. You are shifting the financial burden back to the massive structures that usually hoard it. You cannot protect a family's legacy and generational wealth without utilizing that enterprise infrastructure.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered what the SGB2B standard actually represents at its core?
Well, funding.
It's a tool, yes, but its purpose is ultimately about bringing bedside manners to the boardroom.
The enterprise-level infrastructure, the waivers, the billing codes you are talking about, all of that is entirely secondary to the human goal. Why are we extracting those corporate resources? Why do the homemaker and companion guidelines actually matter?
Like I said, to prevent financial ruin.
Yes, but more than that. They matter so that Arthur's kids can stop panicking, so they can stop staring at that mountain of bills on the kitchen table we talked about at the beginning, so they can simply sit on the front porch and hold their father's hand.
That is the goal, yes.
The corporate infrastructure is totally useless to the individual legacy if it doesn't result in that moment on the porch. The boardroom game is only justifiable if it serves the bedside manners. If you focus only on the SGB-to-B structure, you risk turning the family home into just another satellite branch of the clinic.
I hear that, but, you can't sit on the porch holding his hand if the house has been foreclosed on because you didn't understand the long-term care exclusions and the Medicaid look-back periods.
And you won't even want to sit on the porch if the system has thoroughly convinced you that your father is nothing more than a dying, non-compliant geriatric patient.
Fair point.
That is the insidious danger of the clinical gaze. It medicalizes the relationship between the child and the parent. The adult child stops being a daughter or a son. They become an unpaid stress caregiver who is just managing activities of daily living and checking off boxes for social determinants of health.
Right. They become administrators.
Exactly. The language shift calling him a senior hidden treasure, calling the effort a wraparound family shield, it reclaims the familial bond. It reminds the children in the midst of all that stress that they are honoring a neighborhood pillar, not just managing a case file. The financial safety net you rightly champion only has true value if the emotional safety net is firmly in place first.
Well, I think we are mapping out the boundaries of a really profound dual necessity here. We've gone back and forth on the mechanisms and the mindsets. And if I can summarize my position based on our exchange, protecting a hidden treasure, like Arthur, requires acknowledging that the system we are forced to operate within is a labyrinth of legal and administrative traps.
It certainly is.
You cannot simply wish away network gatekeepers, and you cannot culturally redefine the crushing costs of adult daycare. Mastering the administrative maze, from executing an airtight power of attorney to circumventing automated omission notices, to utilizing the single case agreement loophole, to leveraging enterprise-level SGB-2B standards, that is the most robust, tangible way to stand as a shield for a parent. The boardroom game must be played, and it must be played with absolute legal precision, because the system will exploit any crack in your paperwork to protect its own metrics.
And to summarize my view, I maintain that true protection fundamentally stems from a radical language shift and cultural realignment. If you only play the boardroom game, if you only focus on the legal perfection, you fall victim to the navigator illusion.
Right.
You end up relying on hospital-built entities that do not know your family's name and do not care about your legacy. Rejecting cold institutional jargon is not just poetry. It is a vital, practical defensive strategy against the system that defaults to palliative, end-of-life care and completely ignores the 80% reality of the household budget. By redefining clinical terms into soulful, culturally aligned concepts, a family preserves not just their financial assets, but their dignity, their peace, and the living quality of the person they love.
I will say, looking closely at the material and listening to your perspective, there is a very clear area of convergence between us. It is undeniable that the current clinical system, characterized by those heavy stacks of denial letters and metrics-driven care, is fundamentally hostile to families dealing with dementia.
Absolutely. We both completely agree that passive reliance on hospital structures leads to disaster. If a family just accepts the diagnostic papers, trusts the default nurse navigator without question, and waits for the system to organically guide them, they will be financially and emotionally decimated. The system is designed to protect itself, not Arthur.
The system is not built to save you, it is built to process you.
Right.
And effectively shielding a loved one in that environment is incredibly complex. It demands a rigorous, almost forensic understanding of the cold, hard legal realities. You have to know the checklists, you have to read the health literacy fine print, and you have to understand the network rules to force the doors open.
You do, but alongside a fierce, unyielding commitment to human-centered language. You need the legal key to open the door,
But you need the cultural anchor to remember why you are walking through it in the first place. The profound importance of preserving the soul of the individual beneath the diagnosis.
Yeah, nicely said. There are certainly even deeper layers to the documentation checklists, the SGB-2B standard, and the health literacy guides mentioned in this material that we haven't even begun to unpack. If you're listening, it's clear this is a blueprint that requires immense ongoing study to truly master.
It is a profound challenge, but a necessary one for any family facing this journey.
And it brings us right back to that family kitchen table we started at. The ultimate struggle, whether fought with airtight legal documents or a radical shift in language, is about ensuring that the avalanche of sterile paperwork never manages to bury the photograph of the man who built his life block by block. Thank you for joining us in this exploration.